1 Bravo, extend downwind now. Your number 4 is on a citation on a 5-mile right base.
Extend downwind 470 1 Bravo. Tower 547 Tango Whiskey, visual 24. We're going to square that turn to final right now on base.
547 Tango Whiskey, Palomar Tower. Thank you. Number 3, following a Cub on a mile right base, runway 24, cleared to land.
Number 324, clear to land, 7 Tango Whiskey.
Is that Joy? Negative.
Nope.
She says no Joy.
No Joy, damn.
Brandon, you can use that one.
Christmas on the beach. That's what this music makes me feel like. And it's fitting because I can see the beach from my tower. And I'm trying to stay classy here in San Diego this holiday season, but it's not always like that. And maybe you're stuck somewhere a little more snowy this year. So hopefully I can help you feel like you're on the beach too. Welcome. This is Podcasting on a Plane, and it's been a minute since we've been able to catch up, hasn't it? A lot has happened. With me? Yep, maybe. But this holiday season, things sometimes get crazy. And what's more important is what's been up with all of you in Listenerland. And I have reason to believe that Listenerland has grown quite a bit. So if you're a new listener, I want to take a minute to welcome you. I often describe this show as a view of aviation from both sides of the mic. And I like to give you straight talk about the greatest thing ever, which of course is aviation. And on the show, we get all up in it from as many angles as possible. And of course, have a great time while we do it. My name is Brandon Gonzalez. I'm the guy who's going to make you a better aviator 10 different ways in this episode. I'm an air traffic tower controller at a busy general aviation airport, but I have an extensive background spanning nearly 25 years in aviation as a pilot, as a flight instructor, as an aircraft salesman, a ramper for 2 major airlines, an FBO line serviceman, and I've been a plane crash survivor. This podcast is my little way of serving the aviation community that's been so good to me, and my goal is to share my experiences and those of others who come on the show to help you in your aviation endeavors, whatever they might be. And if you want to talk about them with me, I offer aviation mentoring where you can take advantage of my experience. And if you want to share things with everyone else in the community, my website, podcastingonaplane.com, is set up so you can record me a message using the SpeakPipe widget that pops up on the screen automatically when you go to the site. And you can let us all know what's on your aviation mind. No experience or equipment is necessary. And the recorder even works right off your phone. So we're going to hear a couple of recordings like that in a minute. But for now, well, it's Christmas week. I'm guessing that many of you have some traveling to do. And while you'll likely be on a plane, you may or may not be the one flying it. So I'm guessing you'll have some kinds of other travel time too, and maybe even some downtime if you're lucky. So I thought it might be nice as we sit on this virtual beach together to go over some of the feedback from the community, and you can have a little bit of that wherever you go this season. And we'll be going through 10 of the ways you can become a better and more knowledgeable pilot, even when you're not in the air. Don't go away. So let's talk about Concorde Week for a minute. That was such a fun thing to do, and if you're any kind of fan of aviation, I think the Concorde probably holds a special place in your aviation heart. It certainly does for me, and to sit down with John Hutchinson and record for hours with him was a huge honor. So if you haven't heard those episodes yet, go back and check them out. It's 33 through 36, 4 episodes, and my personal favorite was the final episode in the series, where John recounted the details of the crash of Air France Flight 4590. It's one of those stories we all have a basic understanding of, but the real story is just so incredible. And even if you think you know the story, I'd be willing to make a bet in Vegas that you'll still learn something. Anyway, after those episodes went live, John emailed me this. He says, "I've just been listening to my account of Whiskey Echo. Sorry I didn't mention that Barbara Harrison was posthumously awarded a George Cross for her courage. Anyway, I do hope the podcasts go well and that you get positive feedback. Please keep in touch. Best wishes, John." Okay, so if you haven't heard it yet or don't remember, Barbara Harrison, she was one of the flight attendants on the ill-fated Whiskey Echo flight. And unfortunately, though, she did not survive the post-crash fire. A little background for those of you not familiar, the George Cross is the second highest award in the UK honor system. It's awarded for acts of the greatest heroism or most conspicuous courage in circumstance of extreme danger, not in the presence of the enemy, to members of the British Armed Forces and to British civilians. Posthumous awards have been allowed since it was instituted. So I recommend you go back and check out the episode as number 34, or part 2 of the 4-part Concorde Week series. And John gives us a solid reminder that the actual purpose of flight attendants is not to serve you drinks, but literally and figuratively to get you out of a burning or sinking fuselage. And due in part to her bravery, nearly everybody was able to escape from Whiskey Echo, the burning 707. So a huge thanks to John for doing those episodes with me, and if you're interested in picking up a copy of his book, it's available on Amazon, and there is, of course, a link in the show notes. And if you're interested in getting a signed copy, just email me and we can probably work one out for you. All right, you guys ever get a good case of deja vu? Well, I certainly do sometimes, and I had a really good case recently, and it's courtesy of our first submission here.
Hi, Brendan. This is Daniel from the San Francisco Bay Area. I enjoyed your episode with Max Trescott on Cirrus accents, and in fact, he was my primary CFI. I had an interesting experience that was a little bit similar, and I'm wondering your take as a controller. I was doing pattern work at Livermore and in left traffic for runway 25 left. I was on downwind and I had been cleared to land, or cleared for the option, number one. And I had just begun my descent and I had just turned base when I spotted traffic on a long straight in for 25 left. And the controller asked me to make an immediate right turn back to a downwind leg. I did it, but it was really scary. It was low speed maneuvering and it was very sudden. And it put me more nose to nose with the traffic on final, even though they were below me. And I'm wondering how you would have handled that. It seems to me that telling me to go around, offset to the left, since I was expecting to make a left turn to final, would have been safer. And in fact, if I was number one, then he should have told the straight in traffic to make a left 360 and put him in after me. So anyway, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that. Thanks, and keep up the good work.
Anybody pick up on the deja vu there? All right, well, Daniel's experience sounds exactly like the second Cirrus incident that Max and I talked about, the one that occurred in Florida, doesn't it? And we all remember how that one turned out. So to answer the question, I think it's probably important to talk about how the situation might have transpired and why would a controller have the reaction that they did. So when you work a control tower, you have a really good view of the airport, and you also have a pretty good view of your airspace too, but our view isn't really any better than yours, really, and actually it might even be worse because we're on the ground and not up in the mix, so to speak. So to speak more intelligently about this specific scenario, I really wish I had the ATC audio, or better yet, the radar replay, but since I don't, I'll speak generally about what may have happened. So since you were on base, I wonder if you were maybe on base in a place that the controller did not anticipate, maybe a little further out than they expected you to turn. Now, I'm not saying that you did anything wrong, but it would help things if I knew why you turned base when you did. Again, not because you did anything wrong, but why is it that you guys would be in conflict in the way that you were? So again, assuming nobody's made any mistakes and the controller notices that you and the other aircraft seem to be converging in an unexpected way, let's just pick it up right there, because that's where the scared reaction part happened. Why would a controller tell you turn it back to the right, putting you nose to nose with the aircraft on final, as opposed to just having you continue your turn on final to the left, or just telling the straight-in aircraft to turn to avoid you? I'm guessing that as you turned base, the radar system picked up that you were in conflict with the aircraft on the straight-in. And the reason this happened is because the aircraft on the straight-in was probably on an actual approach and probably therefore had a data tag associated with it. And because of this, the collision alert would activate. And also the controller would be reluctant to break off that aircraft from their approach. Now, assuming the radar is what alerted the situation in the first place, the controller may not have been looking out the windows and was reacting primarily based off of what the radar said. Again, we don't know. But unfortunately, the radar is delayed. And working an aircraft in a traffic pattern based on the radar is usually never a good idea because of this. As aircraft make turns in the pattern, the radar sometimes has difficulty depicting that properly. And assuming that was the case, then telling you to turn back to the downwind based on what is shown on the screen might actually make sense. Unfortunately, though, you're probably right. Turning you back to the downwind would put you directly nose to nose with the straight-in aircraft, wouldn't it? And it also means that you'd have to go from turning in one direction to making another turn in the opposite direction, which compounds things. And before we move on, I do want to mention that since Livermore has parallel runways, there could have been another aircraft on the parallel, which the controller was afraid to put you in conflict with as well. And that's fair. But as you said in your message, though, continuing to turn in front of the aircraft, and then you both going in the same direction and simply sending one of you around probably would have worked out better. But again, this is a complicated situation and I wasn't there. So I don't want to armchair quarterback it too much, but based on what you said, I'll leave you with this. You're the pilot in command. The end. And I'm the last person that would ever sit here and tell you to go against what a controller tells you to do or become argumentative or not follow instructions. Let's get that right. But if in your opinion you feel that whatever the controller told you to do puts you in a really unsafe situation, you can and should exercise your PIC authority to do what you think is right to keep yourself alive. And although you barely had a few seconds to process the situation, I'm sure you're acutely aware of how close you are to your stall speed and how many G's you've imposed on the airframe. If going back the other direction might cause you to stall spin, well, don't do it. Anyway, Daniel, thank you so much for the message, and I hope that helps. And if not, send me another one, and we'll keep working on it. And don't forget, Daniel used the SpeakPipe widget that pops up anytime you visit the website. It'll show up in the lower right. You just click on it. And if you have a question or comment like that, I'd encourage you all to use that feature so we can talk about it on the show. All right, so let's get to that list I promised you. The top 10 things you can do to become a better pilot, even when you're not in the air. And don't worry, these aren't expensive. A few of them are totally free. And the ones that aren't are all less than even renting a 152 to go do 3 trips around the pattern to get current. But my goal is I want to see you get good, like really good. So implement some of these and circle back with me and let me know if they help. So this list isn't in any particular order, but I will finish off the list with my favorites, so make sure to stay till the end. And don't worry, there are links to each item in the show notes. Number 1. You ever heard of Just Planes and Pilot's Eye TV videos? Well, they've been making videos for a long time. Just Planes, actually, I think since the early 90s. Pilot's Eye a little bit more recently. But what these guys do is they rig up a cockpit of a major airliner with a bunch of cameras, and they film an entire flight. In the case of Just Planes, they follow them along on their trip, and it's not really scripted or anything. They just film the crew doing what they do. And in the case of Pilot's Eye, they try to tell a little bit more of a story of kind of the cruise trip and how it's going. But in either case, these are amazing videos shot in high def that are hours and hours long, like 4 hours, 5 hours plus. So you won't miss a single thing that happens on a flight cruise out and back trip. And the coolest part is you can see how things are supposed to be done in a professional environment. Now, obviously this is a multi-crew scenario, so you might wonder how on earth you're going to translate that to your private flying in something like a single engine. But some of the best takeaways are in the pre-flight briefing part and the proper way to do checklists. And that's applicable everywhere. And I always found it really nice to have a role model to emulate when I was training, and I still do actually. So if you watch enough of these, you can really get into the role of a pro. And hey, I know that pre-flight planning I talked about a second ago is probably the least fun part of making a flight, and the crews that you're going to see in these videos, well, they have a dispatcher doing it for them. And I get that. But if you're a private pilot, the closest you can get is using an electronic flight bag or some sort of online planner that kind of automates a lot of the process for you. And that's my recommendation number 2. Is to upgrade your subscription in your flight planner or electronic flight bag. And I'll start by saying that this is not a sales pitch for any one particular one, but my recent personal experience is with ForeFlight. That's the one that I use. And I've used it for so long that I'm comfortable telling you about it and talking about it. So that's all I mean. But this is applicable to any of them. So I used to use Duets online, and I had all of my aircraft performance profiles really well honed, and it made it a breeze to put together a flight plan. And up until pretty recently, ForeFlight used Duet's info in the background to do a lot of the app planning. So for me, it was a no-brainer. But now that Duets is gone, well, I decided to upgrade my ForeFlight subscription to the Performance Plus one. And I've got to say, the profiles are spot on. And now that I'm flying a Meridian turboprop a lot, it's really nice to have that profile ready to go. So how can this make you a better pilot? Well, it'll get you back in the mode of flight planning and performance considerations. Like, it takes a lot of the tedious computations like time, speed, distance out of the equation, and you can really start doing a lot of what-if scenarios quickly. So you can really get to know your airplane better, or maybe even better yet, you can learn a new one, and you can do it a whole lot more easily. Plus, if you're considering purchasing an aircraft and you're not really sure if it's worth it to go turbo, or maybe you're deciding which club plane to take on your annual trip, you can really get solid numbers to help you make your choice. And another fun bonus, actually, is that by doing this, you're becoming familiar with the real-world differences between aircraft types. And some of the data you find, it might actually surprise you. And if you find yourself becoming a fan of a certain aircraft type, that'll bring us to recommendation number 3, which is to join a type club. So now that I'm flying the Piper M600, I've taken a real interest in MMOPA, which is the Malibu and Meridian Owners and Pilots Association, and they do a really good magazine, and they have a ton of resources when it comes to pretty much everything PA-46. And I'm loving catching up on the back issues, and the people you get in contact with are just second to none. And you can find one of these type clubs for pretty much any aircraft type out there. Like, for instance, if you're a Cirrus person, COPA is an amazing resource, and guys like Max Trescott, well, they're really active in that group. And of course, there's the American Bonanza Society, and the list goes on. And if you're an expert in any one aircraft type and you're not a member of one of these clubs, well, then I'd urge you to get involved. One way might be recommendation number 4, which is to write an article. Yeah, no, I'm serious. Even if you don't consider yourself to be an aviation expert yet, there's probably some experience you've had that some other person out there would get value from. Don't hold it in. Even if you're a student pilot still, maybe you could even write about something as simple as why you chose to train in a certain aircraft type. Type Club magazines and a ton of others often need content, and yours might make the cut more easily than you think. Also, publications like Airfax Journal, they're always looking for content. And if you go to airfaxjournal.com, there's a tab right at the top called Write For Us. And if you click it, well, here's what it's going to say. It says Airfax is an online collection of funny, instructive, sentimental, educational, reflective, and about 25 other descriptors, stories written by pilots for pilots. Our writers are experts, whether the writer is a student pilot with 30 hours or an almost retired airline pilot with 30,000 hours. You're an expert too, and that's why we want you to write a story for Airfax. The real-life experience of our readers entertain and inform us. Every year, dozens of everyday pilots just like you write an article for Airfax. And we need your story to continue to provide our online pilot community with stories that make them better pilots, that entertain them, and yes, sometimes even nourish their souls. We wouldn't and couldn't exist without that volunteer effort, and we're grateful for it. So there you go. Pretty easy. And to give you an example, check this out. This is a submission from listener Shyam Jha, and he emailed me this. It says, "Hi, Brandon. I just listened to Max's podcast with you. I'm a Cirrus owner and a CFI II based in Tucson. I noticed Max used the word upwind when referring to the departure leg. This is a common mistake. In fact, I wrote an article about it, and I'll have a link for you guys in the show notes." And he said, "I'm interested in hearing what you think about it." So, of course, I emailed him back, and I said, "Shyam, you're correct. Upwind and departure are often misused and confused terms. So often, in fact, that even Max and I let the wrong word slip out occasionally. And in ATC, something about the word upwind, it seems to flow and be understood better than departure for some reason. That's just my experience, but I'd be willing to bet that most controllers were probably taught to use the word upwind at some point, and for whatever reason, it stuck. So I'm actually going to share the article with you guys. It's actually really short, and that's my point. It's very simple, especially if you notice something a little bit wrong and you want to fix it. And at the end, check out what happened. His article is called "Where is the Upwind Leg?" by Shyam Jha. Said, "I had taken off from a small airport in southern Arizona when the tower asked me to extend my upwind leg. I'll extend departure leg, I acknowledge. I just happen to be fine with my CFI, who's also a controller at the same airport." Nice. My CFI gave me a quizzical look. I asked, "Why do controllers use incorrect terminology to describe the departure leg?" "Incorrect? I've been a controller for 30 years and I've never used the phrase departure leg," he said. Next day, I showed him the FAA airport traffic pattern diagram from the 2017 AIM. He dismissed it as, "That's something we don't use," end quote. Now, I'm based in a non-towered airport where pilots self-announce their position in the traffic pattern. Nearly 100% of the time, the departure leg is called out as upwind. In fact, I had a conversation with a pilot based at the same field who announced he was on the upwind leg, whereas he was on departure. He was not happy when I corrected him. I was determined to get to the root of this one glaring inconsistency in how pilots see themselves in the pattern. It seems the main source of this misinformation is CFIs. I've been asking CFIs I meet, both in person and online, about the difference between the departure leg and the upwind leg. Most have professed never using the phrase departure leg. They also wrongly believe the departure leg is the upwind leg. One even went as far as saying, "I don't care what the AIM says, I teach my students what pilots actually say." Well, the AIM manual defines these legs as follows, and then he defines departure and upwind. The pilot controller glossary defines the upwind leg correctly. Interestingly enough, it does not mention departure leg at all. This may be the root cause of why controllers are not using the term departure leg. I implore CFIs to teach the correct terminology to their students. The FAA needs to do a better job in teaching controllers the correct terminology as well. The FAA has done a good job in focusing on runway incursions. They need to focus their attention on making sure we all use the traffic pattern terminology correctly and not make it up as we go. This will ensure a safer flying environment for all. And that's the end of his article. He then added later an epilogue that says, "I was able to get the attention of senior FAA management, and they've promised to revise the pilot controller glossary as well as the AIM to emphasize correct usage of traffic pattern terminology." And I'll have a link to the letter in the show notes. Oh, there you have it. So I emailed Shyam back, and I said, "Shyam, I read your article, and you're spot on, and I'm glad that you got the attention of someone at the FAA that has the power to make the change." So Shyam saw something he didn't like, he wrote an article about it, got the attention of somebody that could change it, and that's it. True story. And while Shyam's obviously a motivated go-getter type, there's nothing that says you can't go do the same. And anyway, how can I say that without really knowing him? Well, actually, I do know him now, because about a week after he emailed me, he took part in my next recommendation. So here we go. Recommendation number 5, which is to visit an ATC facility in person. Now, Shyam was mentoring a new Cirrus owner, Dr. Elias, and they decided to do their training out in Southern California for the day, and they visited my tower during the instructional period. We had a really cool time, and they racked up a ton of knowledge about ATC that they can take with them forever. And a facility visit is totally free. So I urge you to check out your local facility and put some faces to the voices and get a dialogue or maybe even a friendship going, who knows? But Brandon, what if I can't seem to get in touch with my facility? Or I don't have a tower nearby? How else can I get in on the ATC Inner Circle? Well, guess what? I have a recommendation for that too. And it's number 6, which is join an online group. Now, I know that most people aren't huge fans of Facebook right now, and I can't say I blame you, but there are some really great groups in there, and I'm a part of some of them, and you can be too. Again, for free. If you're looking to get the ATC scoop, go to Facebook and maybe join the one called Ask a Pilot / Air Traffic Controller. I'm in there, as are about 5,700 other aviation professionals on both sides of the mic, and it's a treasure trove of ATC knowledge, and it goes both ways. Often controllers are asking questions of pilots in there too, so go check it out. And while you're online, whatever you're doing, open up a new tab and take part in recommendation number 7, which is listen to liveatc.net. If you're not familiar with it, liveatc.net is an online streaming service of air traffic control. And if you're looking to up your communications game, there's really no better way to totally immerse yourself with it. Now, the streams are 100% free to listen to, they don't require a subscription, and they're real time. Well, okay, there's a 7-second delay or so, but who's counting? Now, technology's great, but sometimes it's cool to just go old school, like to read a book. And that's suggestion number 8, is read a good aviation book. And this isn't hard. There are hundreds or probably thousands of them out there. But let me explain what I'm talking about. Now, it's fun to go read about golden era stuff and times gone by that'll never happen again. But the issue here is that while you're going to get all sentimental and misty-eyed, it won't really help you become a better pilot. So what I'm asking you to do is pick like a modern text about something that you're really interested in learning about. For instance, if you've not flown an aircraft with glass panel avionics, go pick up something like Max Trescott's G1000 guide. It's a fun read and you'll learn a lot. See what I mean? And there are many good aviation writers that have texts just like that about specific topics that you might want to learn about. And of course, I'll have links in the show notes. And I was actually thinking about another guy who writes some amazing stuff for aviation too, and that's Rod Machado. Now, I've learned a ton from him over the years, and it's probably time we give him some love on the show. So his books are really cool because they don't just teach technical skills, but they incorporate a bunch of psychology too. That's kind of what sets him apart. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. But hey, if you just can't resist and you want to go old school sometimes, I don't know, pick up something from maybe Bob Buck, or, hey, I've got it, try The Wind Beneath My Wings. You remember The Wind Beneath My Wings, right? That's John Hutchinson's book. Now, I've read it myself. It's fantastic. And again, if you want a signed copy, just let me know and I can probably get you one. And to really put some wind beneath your wings, sometimes it takes another person to really help you. And that's recommendation number 9, is find yourself a good mentor. Not a recruiter, not someone who wants to reminisce about the old school or whatever, but someone who's in it now. Someone who's been in it long enough to know what they're talking about, but also that's still relevant. So who's that? Where am I going to find somebody like that? Well, I do a lot of it, and I'd be happy to help you out if I can. And if you're interested, go to the website and email me. But a ton of other people do it too. Other well-known podcasters like Captain Jeff over at APG. At a certain Patreon level, he'll do some monthly mentoring with you. And so will Max Trescott. And actually, I think as far as I know, Rod Machado will still do flight reviews. You might have to meet him at John Wayne, but I think he'll still do a flight review with you. Same thing with Max. You can meet and fly with him, particularly if you're a Cirrus owner. And, you know, it isn't free in any of these cases, but it's a small investment. And investing now in your brain trust is going to pay off big time in the long run. And we've made it now to number 10. Last but not least, my all-time favorite. Listen to aviation podcasts. That's right. And it's funny, I'm not joking with you, but by the very nature of you hearing me recommend this to you, well, you of course are already doing that. But there are a ton of new aviation podcasts popping up all over the place. And each host, for the most part, has really something of value to share with you. And you can get better just by listening to all the content. It's sitting there, ready for you to consume. Free. But even more importantly, you can submit content to nearly all of these shows and get really good perspective on whatever it is you shared. And then everybody else can hear and learn from your submission too. everybody wins. And speaking of really good other aviation podcasts and air traffic control, well, now's a good time to mention an iTunes review I got from a guy called Romeo Hotel 3. I think I've heard those initials before, like on the Opposing Bases podcast. That's right, RH is one of the hosts of Opposing Bases, and if you don't listen to his podcast, I recommend that you do. And he says, podcasting on a plane, this podcast, of course, is the perfect mix of news, interviews, and Brandon's unique aviation experience. Fresh material, valuable conversation, and first-hand knowledge come together for the perfect aviation show. Thank you. Well, RH, you're welcome, and thank you for your awesome show, too. So RH and AG, they keep it straight air traffic on their show, and if that's your thing, definitely go check them out. I've been a listener since day one, and we've even done a collaboration together. It was episode 27 of this show and episode 33 of Opposing Bases. It was called The Great East-West ATC Throwdown. And again, RH, thanks for the awesome review, man. So there you go. 10 ways you can become a better pilot. But before we go, I really want to say what a great year 2018 has been. And this will be the last podcast of the year, and I can't begin to tell you how excited I am for 2019 to get here. And an extra special thank you, of course, goes to the patrons of the show. Their generous contributions really keep this thing going. And if you want to join that special group, check out patreon.com/podcasting on a plane. And that will put you in the same company as people like Max Trescott, who I'd actually like to give a special thank you to and welcome as our newest show patron. Thanks, Max. Our collaborations this year were so enjoyable, and here's to many more. And hey, if Patreon isn't your thing for whatever reason, maybe just click the link to buymeacoffee.com, where you and I can grab a $3 coffee together and I'll read your name on the show, just like Violet Aviator did. And she shared with me a really neat story about her aviation journey. And I'd love to hear yours too. Thank you, Violet. So, thank you all for listening and subscribing in 2018. It's an honor for me to spend time with you on the podcast and on YouTube. And until next time, good day.
I'm Glenn from Wellington, New Zealand. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brandon's comments and those of his guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on this podcast are his and those of his guests. They're not necessarily those of the FAA. There is no nexus between podcasting in the plane and the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not to act as your CFI, nor is your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun. It is no way in shape or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this podcast may be. Glenn out.